Yeah. Okay. So, welcome everyone. Todd wasn't able to join us for the conversation on the first chapter, but we are going to talk to the three of us on the second chapter of Presence in the Modern World. It's a title. The chapter is entitled "Revolutionary Christianity," and maybe we should just start there. Sarah, can you um, distinguish between what he is and is not saying, and titling the chapter this way?
Yeah, thank you, because I think this chapter is probably the most to understand his whole statement, because many of the terms and the rhetoric will be believed by, since we are operating mainly in mainline, stick with that for now. Uh, Mainline Christians think this is their language, think these are their concepts. I think they are operating a Christian chapter, and I'm just going to call it they're not. So it's to understand what Ellul means in this chapter, to understand, I think, the entire project that he is undertaking. So, to get started, the first thing he says is that there is a profound felt need. And remember, this book is published in 1948 for some kind of revolution. And of course, this is very soon after enormous political upheavals have been going on, for years, but particularly the ones with the communist revolutions and then the fascist revolutions and then the Second World War being fought and everything. And yet, 100 years on into political revolution, and no one is satisfied. He has, I think, the most extraordinary sentence. It is not unreasonable for the average person today to be completely distraught. Again, this was written almost 80 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is different? And so he said everybody feels that somehow we can't go on, and yet has no idea how to go about changing it. And I think, well, let me pause there.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful for Todd. You can weigh into talk about the way he uses in this chapter the idea of stasis, the idea of apocalyptic, and fact, and then how uh, religion generally, but Christianity specifically, gets wrapped up in what he calls facts.
Right. Well, all right. So let's take this one by one. So first, with revolution as opposed to stasis or deadlock. So what he specifically means there is that, let's just use his word technique as the catch-all word. This is the discovery with the Industrial Revolution and the scientific practices that preceded of how much you can control outcomes and increase efficiency. And like we said last time, a lot of very practical good came out of that in feeding people and clothing people and housing people and so forth. The problem is it was so incredibly successful, it extended to all areas of life. And so what Elul is looking at now is saying that this commitment technique as the meaning of life and the way to always improve and grow in life has metastasized into all areas. So produce this much, we will produce more. If there are this many products, then there will be more products. If the state has this much power, there will be that much more power. If humans subordinate themselves to the center, more of the same. So again, like I kind of quipped last time, I'm frustrated by people who like to dunk on capitalism. As he shows in this chapter, communism, in fact, every political and economic system on earth is all in thrall to technique, into the more and more and more. And that's what he means by the stasis or deadlock that everyone feels. Sometimes, people come out with kind of high flown sounds about how we need to revolutionize things. And that's obviously been around for a long time. But I think Elul is so helpful because he puts his finger on why nobody gets anywhere. It just is more and more of the same. Because well, he makes the interesting observation. Here's another quote: "To free humankind, we would start by destroying everything that still remains free in person. The only way we could have a revolution is by engaging in more of the practices that make revolution so necessary in the first place." This is why I don't understand. I just personally here, I don't understand anyone's commitment to any political party as such.
Mhm.
Uh, they're all just doing the same thing. It doesn't matter. I'm sorry if you're deeply offended on one side or the other, but the goals are ever so slightly different. The rhetoric is ever so slightly different, but the underlying structure, as Ellul says, is this total deadlock, stasis, commitment to technique.
Yeah. Todd, what would you add to that?
Um, I think that uh, how he works in uh, structures as sort of the language of that underlying form, and so I'm not sure if when he talks about facts, if that also takes in structures, because in that quote that Sarah was just referencing, where he talks about the fact that communism and fascism are essentially all operating from the same structure. I think it's important to note. So I just kind of go along with Sarah's assessment that I think the parties, for instance, in our current system, are doing the same thing because they're rooted in the same structure.
Mm.
Yeah, because well, we discussed this a little bit last week, Sarah, that the stasis is such that inherent in the word progress for all of us is the assumption that it will make things better.
Right. Right.
that we've been conditioned to have that prejudice. Um, and
And one
yeah,
one Wings likes to call itself progressive, with the assumption that we're not good enough, but we're going to keep getting better, and these are the techniques we employ to get better. And it's not even about, in this case, the content. It's the assumption, the drive forward through the technique.
we're not going back.
No. Right.
And Ellul makes the point, right? That like history can't be repeated. You can't go back. But yeah, reducing it to a slogan is more
Which
problematic.
people on the other side are also progressive, because in this sense they're trying to
Right.
the next good place, and the way we get to the good place is by deploying technique.
Yeah, and that's where the quote you mentioned, he goes on. This is where he introduces the apocalyptic. So it is not unreasonable for the average person today to feel completely distraught. This is what matters. And besides, as Christians, it is essential to understand that each moment we live through is actually not historical, but apocalyptic. If we take the fall seriously, the expulsion from Eden, which entails the constant presence of death, and if we take seriously the promise of Christ's return, of which we know neither the day nor the hour, we must indeed consider the present moment as apocalyptic, which is to say, as the final moment before judgment and pardon. The only vision that Christians can have of the world they live in is an apocalyptic one. Well aware that the present moment may not be the end of the world in the historical sense, they must act as if it were the last. This is the meaning of the counsel often given: keep watch. What counts is not the world's actual end, but that life is truly apocalyptic at this very moment. This is the sense in which our world is apocalyptic.
Mm. I think it's important to put some more flesh on the word apocalyptic, because it's taken over by
Mm-hmm.
premillennialist fantasy novels. But but people hear of post-millennial fantasy politics, which is that if we just keep moving a little more technique, we will finally get to either the conditions of the kingdom, or we will have, done enough good works for Christ to make it the kingdom, or whatever is going on here. By apocalyptic, I mean in the more classic biblical sense, it's both the disclosure of what could not otherwise be known, of the unveiling of God's power, but also the crisis moment, the Greek krisis, or also kairos, this moment of confrontation. And often when I discuss this with parishioners, I say, we do not know when the end of everything will happen, but we know that the end of we ourselves is coming someday. And for some of us, sooner than later, we don't actually know. But there is that confrontation with the ultimate end of ourselves that's always there. And I think what he's seeing is that this totalizing deadlock of the world of technique allows you to kind of distance yourself from your own apocalyptic end, because you are caught up. Your actual transcendence is in the greater totalizing system, which is exactly what it wants of you. But he also is reflecting on a genuine frustration or deadlock in our own moral agency, because more than ever there is no way to operate outside of the complicity zone. Every single thing we do is caught up in every single thing we hate, and the panic effort to extract ourselves, to try to find some place to even have a slightly easy conscience. Maybe it was not the case before we lived in the hyper connected and industrial world, but I think it was probably easier to not to be constantly aware of the misery of 8 billion other people somehow being entailed in your own.
Mm.
Mm.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. There's only one episode I can think of, right, where the disciples are asking Jesus about a current event.
The cloud.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Mhm.
yeah.
Uh, um, uh, 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 yeah. Well, I've got dog-eared pages here that I want us to talk about, but Todd, you jump in here and
You've got dog-eared pages. I just nearly underlined every sentence in the entire chapter. So, I think that I find it interesting that, having kind of read in different places, starting maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where there was a critique of what the phrase they used was the as is structure, but no one ever pushed like Ellul has, at least in my reading here, to how to um, engage that structure in a way that's faithful. He gets, and I know this is kind of jumping way ahead, so you can back up, of course. But when he moves to the place of what our response is, um, given the current kind of context, it's fitting, because either one, you try to take over the structure, or you directly rebel against it.
Hmm.
And he offers neither of those. His dialectic move is to say, well, this is kind of the normal thing, but here's a different way. And I couldn't help but think, I just read the other day a Ronner sermon on Lent, and he was going through the temptations, and he pretty well kind of gave a different picture of the same thing. We think that the result would be for Jesus to say, "Look, I'm God," um, or "Hey, you don't know who you are." Instead, he takes a different tact in his response to live within, um, to put it this way, the mission that God has given him. And so I think that's where I found this really helpful, because to your piece you wrote this morning that I was reading before we started, that we seem to have this knee jerk need to make a statement or have some kind of response. There's no time to kind of think through it or work through it or kind of figure out where's the place I need to sit with this.
Hmm.
And I think that he's incredibly helpful in how he frames up, uh, as you've already noted. Here we are all these years later, and it seems like, oh, we are his audience today, and if we could just take a cue um, from his observations, I think we might find ourselves more faithful to what God has called us to.
Todd, I like that, because what you're pointing out is that whether we are aligning ourselves with it or rebelling against it, we're still treating the institutions,
Yeah,
the facts,
right,
as the ultimate frame of reference. And that this is responding primarily and directly to that. But that means those institutions, in the broad sense, they have the right to set all the terms.
right,
And claim all the attention. And it's Ellul isn't saying, like, "Well, just pretend they don't exist and you'll be
right,
fine." But he's talking about this totalizing that we concede to when we jump to making our discipleship depend on the way we are aligning or rebelling with the institution. It's still the institution, not God. It is the primary frame of reference.
yeah. And I think that's one of the ways in which we're giving it more power. Uh,
Yes.
you know, and I don't think we realize that. That's an interesting insight. gives us to consider that's the means whereby we're giving the very thing that we're objecting to the more power over us, our framing, our way we see the world, or the way our options for response. So that's one way we're giving it more power. So we're doing the thing we don't want to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't help. So I've been reading a little with, um, with facts happening in front of me, right? And so like what I was thinking is that before I even found out that we were going to war against Iran, um, um, scores of my fellow clergy and ecclesial leaders had already like put out statements. um, and that gets at, I think, what Ellul means by the perniciousness of facts. That we just assume what is presented to us as facts they are the most real thing,
Mm.
and then they are determinative then for how we engage the world. Can you say that a little bit more precisely, Sarah?
Well, what's interesting is that that's not even a question of whether the facts are true. So you need to read his book on propaganda if you want to ask the question. But this is in some way a deeper critique, because this is the other kind of component of the structural world we live in he's drawing attention to. He says that the only true worship today is of the fact. And again, this is, I think, downstream of a philosophical shift with the rise of Enlightenment science. And I would just like to state for the record, I am not one of those nostalgic Christians who think that like everything went wrong with the Enlightenment or with Luther or with Constantine or whatever your point of failure was. But it is true, again, because we have to take seriously because of the radical success of this different way of looking at natural reality, which itself is probably a fruit of long habits, long Christian habits. That's a topic for another time. But the fact is the only real thing. And because it's real, it is indisputable. He says that, oh, this is really interesting. He says, we worship facts more than we worship the dollar, the race, or the proletariats. And again, with lots of wildly flung critiques of the mainline regarding dollars and races and proletariat, it's really stunning to hear this kind of critique. But for him, it's the fact is something like what is imposed upon our thoughts and our feelings in a way that they just come crashing into our consciousness, and we feel or experience that we have no choice but to respond to them. We have to think through everything, and in a time of instant news and constant innovation, there are just always things forcing themselves on us. So his example in 1948 is not surprisingly the atomic bomb. But I immediately thought of AI as only the latest in the, ongoing internet. I don't want to call it revolution. Waves of new facts that you have to deal with. Quite apart from what AI is, I'm so interested in how people talk about it constantly because they have the fact. And also with the whole digital revolution, I've been fascinated how many apologists and defenders there are for facts that we can't get away from anyway. Like I often hear they, well, look, it's coming. You got to deal
Yeah.
with it. You have to
Yeah.
about it. So you might as well just, I don't know, roll over and take it. But it's so weird to me that humans feel that
Obey in advance.
yeah, to state this when there's not anything we can do about it anyway. Like you're kind of unless you're maybe more than 80. I kind of like am envious of elderly people now. You don't really have to think about it too much. But other than that, well, it's just a fact. And now you got to have an opinion about it. And now you got to decide what you're going to do about it. And there's so many all the time. How can you find the mental clarity, the peace of mind, peace of emotion to even begin to think clearly about anything and resist its factedness coming at you?
And this is contrasted with, or this plays into how we think about um, the decline of Christianity, or how Ellul puts it, is the de-Christianization of Christianity. And so he says on my page 22, fact Fact and truth seem to everyone as one and the same. And if God is no longer true today, it is because he does not look like a fact. Thus, religion is produced from this feature of the masses' firm conviction. To have a religion, no grand declarations and dogmas or ceremonies and practices are needed. All that is required is the support of the crowd's heart. So if we are looking for what the collective worship of our time consists in, it is easy to see that regardless of its form, it has to do with the fact. It is enough to leaf through illustrated newspapers to realize this. Those who question the value of the fact incur the harshest of all reproaches today. They are reactionaries. They want to return to the good old days, and so on.
I love his comments on God not looking like a fact. This means proving proofs in the technical sense of God's existence have always been a fool's errand, but maybe because proof is so central to our civilization today, it has finally come glaringly into relief that proving God is already conceding something other than God as the framework for thinking about God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or I mean, it's revealing that to what you were saying earlier, right? That we live in the world such that we feel we have to immediately respond to everything that's presented to us as a fact. And that our self-perception and to the righteousness that we present to the world is tied up in that. But, whether or not the Lord of heaven and earth might be a crucified Jew born to Mary, that is a fact that doesn't come with a lot of urgency for even Christians.
Alas. Whereas follow the news really closely, it's like saying, I am a determinedly irresponsible person poaching off all the rest of you. That's the moral valence it has.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't help, because we're doing this book in Lent too, it's called my attention to how the gospel passages for this year of Lent are essentially just private conversations that Jesus has, that for all we know had no immediate effect upon anyone other than the individual person that he was engaged with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jesus is not afraid of the what is entirely personal and private. And I think that is another part of the especially mass communication technology, which of course we're engaging in right here, but there's some sense in which unless it is public, it doesn't count. I mean, like my denomination is so obsessed with public theology. Like if you pray in secret in your closet where only your heavenly Father sees you, well, that's not enough because then only your heavenly Father sees you. Want a reward, you should be giving away your soul to the public so others are edified and come along in our progress towards the future. And I mean, again, there of course is a place for witness and costly witness, but I don't think anyone until the present day has really seriously thought you can make a meaningful public witness with no interiority, no privacy, no secrecy, nothing, strictly between you and the Lord God Almighty alone. There's just like almost a complete severance, and your rootedness is always in this publicness, which for us now is almost always performative to some degree. There's no, lack of a self-awareness of how you're, I don't know. We're all living in reality TV now or something.
There's no social cost that comes with overlaying your Facebook profile picture with the latest symbol, right?
Right.
And actually, the social cost probably is for not doing that.
Right. Well, that's another not to be on Facebook. I'm gonna say it again. I also think I've been thinking lately that handwriting is a radical act of resistance because if it is at least not immediate. I mean, you can take a photo of it, right? But fundamentally, to handwrite something is to keep it for a very small audience. And as someone who is, writer for publication, and that is something I've been doing for nigh on 30 years now, I've sort of rediscovered handwriting as, this is just for me, and it feels it's a bit of a guilty pleasure nowadays.
So we have kids the same age, Sarah. Like, is Zeke able to like, what is his handwriting like? Can he sign his name?
Yes, I have a hard time reading it, but in all fairness, his dad, who grew up in a non-internet era, also has terrible handwriting, so I can't exactly lay that there. However, interestingly, he told us semester he wanted to use paper notebooks and pens for note-taking in class. He said, "I just can't take it in if I have a laptop with me in my college classroom." So, it's like, that's a good one of the things we taught you stuck. Yay.
That's good.
Love music. Yeah. Uh,
Um,
I think we should talk about now what actually Ellul means by the revolutionary presence.
yeah,
We've stripped away all of the and. This is probably the point at which Ellul completely won me over, not by critique, but by way of positive vision, because he says Christians are a revolutionary presence, not by their own will or deed, but by Christ's choosing them and working and acting through them. So to be a revolutionary presence is a situatedness as the chosen of Christ in the world, not activity. You know all the theological reasons why this completely won me over. That it's the agency of Christ is the primary thing, which also means it's something that is very hard to control or colonize for anyone's political or totalizing purposes. I just thought I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to everything else you have to say now.
and again, it's necessarily pointed at the laity.
Yes. Yes, though I think
Um,
you need to take more lessons from Ellul.
yeah. So he starts doing this on page 26. Um, so he starts this section, Christian situation in the world is a revolutionary one. They contribute to the world's preservation by being in the world's midst a revolutionary and inexhaustible power. And then he goes on down here. He says, he's talking about the Holy Spirit. Um, but the fact that during certain periods Christians lose sight of the revolutionary implications of their faith does not mean, therefore, that the Holy Spirit ceases to be at work, or the Christian's situation ceases to be revolutionary to the extent that they confess their faith within the world. Um, and you had made a comment about Herwas earlier, Sarah, before we recorded, and I think this is where Stanley would resonate with Ellul's argument that so much of what Christians get wrong, Stanley says, is to not realize that the practices that Christ gives the church, like those are the politics that we're to practice.
Mhm.
The passing of the peace, the praying with one another, the taking the bread and the cup.
Mm.
Um, there's nothing more revolutionary we need to do than those things.
Well, especially if they're actually the focus of our attention.
Mhm.
So much of how I hear, again, the mainline talk about things like prayer or communion is it's instrumental. Like, if you
Mhm.
do this, then you will become the revolutionary presence the world actually needs. I find almost no sense that they are the end in themselves, they are the good in themselves, that actually praying to the Lord God Almighty is the most amazing and wonderful thing you can do, or that receiving Jesus' body and blood. That's it. I one time got into almost an altercation at a certain assembly when the photographer was there to take a picture of every single person coming up to communion, and clearly was hoping for the most racial and ethnic diversity possible. And I was like, put that away. Do not photograph me taking the Lord's body and blood. I am not a photo op. Like, this most sacred
Mhm.
moment is not something for you to do PR with. And I later complained about it, and they're like, but we're trying to share the story with all the people who can't be here. And I think that shows right there what the true value is, like, what the real good is. It's the PR for the non bodily present audience, not the actual reception of the sacrament that is holy and therefore of highest value.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways in which I think um, the laity are more faithful than their leaders. Um,
Oh,
you know, that I think um, the length of prayer lists in congregations, I think, reflects that the average worshiper believes that prayer does things in a way that I think has been trained out of seminary students. That I just think every Sunday I can think of the people who, after receiving the sacrament, pray intensely at the altar, or the people who come up and are crying, receiving the host, or like will grab my hands, um, kind of intensely. That there's a number of people for whom that's the most important thing for them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think too often preachers and church leaders do too much to imply that those aren't uh, what Ellul calls the facts of their lives.
Mm. Yeah. I think also, one thing I like about this is that Ellul preserves the churchliness of the church, specifically the called outness of the church. So he has this rather extraordinary deployment of the spies of Israel who go
Hmm.
to Canaan to scope out the land and prepare their colonization of it. Uh, I imagine this is not a popular motif in mainline preaching, but, but this,
I mean, not even like I don't know that anyone preaches from Joshua at all. So
yeah, right. Well, it's rare. Um, it wouldn't be my first choice of text from Joshua, but the idea that like Christians are not the rest of the world, and that they infiltrate as spies, and their presence is small and unique and distinctive. This again is one of my m- biggest frustrations with the mainline and the rhetoric. I would say even ideology of radical welcome is that it's attempts just definitionally to make the world and the church the same thing, and thereby deprive the church of any distinctive or costly presence, and also absolve themselves of any serious evangelization to Jesus Christ rather than to the team church as the way it plays out. And I think Elul really grasps here that the world will continue to exist qua world. He doesn't have any
mhm.
expectation of even evangelistic progress that we're going to get everybody, and everybody is going to be a verbally confessing, sacrament receiving Christian in the world. That's not the horizon he's working at, which I think is intrinsic to his argument, because then Christianity itself becomes totalizing.
Mhm.
And although you often hear in the mainline critiques of totalizing Christianity, they've just reintroduced it under different cover. It's no longer the overt imperial, like convert or die. Now it's much more the subtle ideology of basically you're already in. And but we said it, all are welcome. Why are you not here? Why aren't our diversity stats better? We told you that you belong here and you're welcome here. Uh, it's so many church websites and signs like all are welcome. No, we really mean it. No, really, you're welcome. And must not be here because you don't think that you already are welcome enough. So we're just going to keep doubling down on it. So I find Elul's insistence on the distinctiveness of Christian presence to be a huge relief from all totalizing ideologies of church, whether they are old school or new school imperial.
So to help people grab a hold of that, do you want to point us to a passage here?
Oh, let's see. I just have my handwritten notes here. I've been talking like
Oh,
something.
that's okay. That's okay. Um, yeah. So when he moves to the conclusions, um, the first order of conclusions, he says on page 33, he wants to distinguish between eschatology and moralism.
Hmm.
So Todd, Sarah, help people understand um, these two different frames. A kind of a moralistic posture that the church can have towards the world versus an apocalyptic one where we interpret all events from the perspective of the coming end.
Todd, you take a first crack at it because I realize I got to get my cord from my phone. I'm going to turn off my camera just, but I'm still here.
Okay. Okay. Um, maybe this is a risk, so you can correct me. So there's rumor, I haven't confirmed, that there is a underlying view of ushering in particularly the eschaton in this current military action. Being very vague. And so I think that would be an eschatological way to kind of view the moral value of the movement or of the action or of the decision. Instead of looking at what's taking place as being a revelatory of the conditions of the world, which is apocalyptic. So if we're gonna look at events and say, what's this revealing in the apocalyptic sense, that's a distinction. So we're not focusing on can we talk about the moral good of this particular action, but instead, what's the action revealing, whether it's about the facts or the structures or the as-is condition of the world. We look at events as are they getting us to where we think we're going? And I don't know if that's exactly the way Ellul would put it, but I think that's a differentiation between an eschatological view that views events as are they getting us where we think we're supposed to be going, and if we're going to keep with this particular way of looking at it, these are the structures that exist. We're not challenging or changing them, but we're wanting to manipulate the structures to get where we think we ought to go. Where apocalyptic, I think, is where he's going to go is no, this is revelatory, and the posture and position that the church or Christians take in the world is revelatory of a faithful commitment to cross and resurrection. So that's my stab. So I need you experts on Ellul to refine or correct.
Expert. I've just started.
Yeah, I'm
You're
only
way ahead of me.
Well, I think again, what you're saying is if all events and facts and political movements are getting us towards where we need to get, then it can excuse anything. I mean,
Right.
any violence is ultimately justified if that's how you usher in the kingdom. And I think again, this is where I found it can sound very like the wrong kind of passive or even despairing without filling in Ellul's very specific alternative. And he is deliberately anti-utopian, but also believes there is like substantial definable things that Christians can say, this is what we work toward in the world. And it's not ultimate progress or the kingdom. So, for instance, he says Christians are to act in the world not in the hope of making it a paradise, but only of rendering it tolerable, which I think is actually really kind of fascinating because almost all, again, in the heightened rhetoric we're in right now, everything is utopian and ultimate. And when things go wrong, people experience a level of shock and betrayal. Like, but I thought we were almost there. Like, I thought the age of Aquarius really was coming and it's not. Or, Fukuyama, I'm sure Francis Fukuyama had a lot more interesting things to say than the end of history with his, Triumph of Capitalism book. I'm sorry, Fukuyama. But, that kind of like, well, we should be done by now. And also, Ellul says specifically, our job is not that of making the kingdom of God come, but only making a world in which the gospel may be proclaimed. So there's like a very specific and limited set of political commitments entailed in this and he'll go into more detail later on too. But I think that's just kind of a very helpful corrective of what we are really aiming toward in our actual activity in the world while remaining grounded in the action of Christ in us.
Yeah, it's the way Stanley will put it is, it's not the call of Christians to make history come out right.
Yeah.
And what and Bonhoeffer makes the same point when he wants to distinguish between the ultimate and the penultimate.
Right.
The church is concerned for the the penultimate in people's lives so that they're in a position to better hear the gospel, which is the ultimate. That it's hard to be evangelized if you're starving to death or have
right.
bombs dropped on you.
So is
Exactly.
it fair? So is it fair to say that when he introduces what he's going to refer to as a particular form of Christian realism, he's cautioning against this becoming an idealism? Is that fair?
I think so. And I think there's also a respect of the givenness of creation. I mean, of course, for Ellul as a Christian, creation is God's, but evidently God is willing to let people live in it without reference to him if they choose not to. And yet it still is itself. There is still, cycles of photosynthesis and sexual differentiation and night and day and all these kind of things that need to happen for creation, even in the most basic sense, to function. There's I think Ellul grants a respect and a penultimate reality to that, and that Christians neither deny it nor try to alter it in their own utopian constructions of how creation ought to be instead. Hence my belief in the blasphemy of saying making the world a better place.
I mean, to talk about stasis, I just, just last week I got an email from a denominational leader, inviting us to participate in this Lenten thing. And the premise of the whole pitch was, that we're called to build the kingdom of God on earth. And that's of a piece with like, well, if we only study this book, then people will no longer be racist, as though sin is not a power in the world.
Yeah.
And it's just remarkable to me that these ways of speaking like persist in the church.
Yeah. Whenever I hear someone talk about building the kingdom of God, I always think of the Princess Bride. I don't think that means what you think that means. But yeah, it's just this is not a term people use much anymore, but that is the post-millennialist heresy, that it's us working harder, doing more political and social engagement that will in fact usher in the kingdom of heaven in a naturalistic sense, in continuity with this world. And I think in some ways, but maybe particularly for Americans living in North America, we are so far from um, the direct, real experience of total civilizational breakdown that Ellul, writing in 1948 as a European and as a French European, had recently experienced, that we have forgotten the dangers of the post-millennialist delusion, but he certainly had it. On the other hand, the fact that this book speaks so profoundly to us 80 years later, I think is the proof of the stasis. How can a book written 80 years ago, talking about things like technological civilization, feel exactly of the moment now? I think that's the proof right there that he's right about this.
And that, your comment points to there is the stasis he writes about in this chapter can also lead to a kind of decadence where we just presume the structures of our of our nation, of our world, of our culture will continue to move on, and therefore Christians can afford to major in the minors.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
very much
mm.
so. Yeah, again, that commitment to the penultimate things for the good of the world. Again, this seems like the rhetoric of mainline Christianity, but I think it has really been captivated by this like utopian twiddling and not at the really fundamental issues. Um,
Oh,
anyway,
and maybe we talked about this last week, but it became more apparent again in this chapter that one of the surprising things is that Ellul is a lay theologian, and yet he seems to believe more in a living God than a lot of preachers do.
yeah, yeah. Maybe
um,
that's why, as you you suggested.
so Gary says it's fascinating to me that Jacques Ellul was friends with Guy Debord and the Situationists International. When he queried Debord about joining the SI, Debord asked his colleagues, and the predictable response was, "No, you are a Christian." So I need to know more to appreciate that
I do
fully.
not understand that reference. I noted in the footnotes that it was Aldous Huxley who advocated for Ellul to be translated into English. That's the guy
Right.
who wrote Brave New World.
Right.
That kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies all over.
Hmm. That's just,
Yeah. It's interesting what you say, Jason, about him speaking as if God is alive and active and real. I as somebody who likes to read dogmatic theology, one thing that struck me more and more is how little dogmatic theology actually speaks as if there are principalities and powers,
Mhm.
including on the, let's say, on the outside, and that the power of sin on the inside. It's like almost you can discuss like Trinity and Christology and even like justification and salvation without really attending to why
Yeah.
exactly it's hard for us to entrust ourselves to God or believe there is a God or anything. And again, one thing I find so striking in Elul is that he writes as if Christ is present and reigning, as if the Perusia is a significant, maybe of greatest significance fact for how we are living now, the eventual Perusia of Christ, and that we are contending with principalities and powers without and sin with a capital S within. I mean, it's like it's actually he's writing about something.
yeah,
And
there's
yeah.
so we've had this so the heater at our parsonage is not working and it's really cold, so we drove to Harrisonburg yesterday. um and but we've had this house for almost a year now, and there's a church right over less than a block away by the rec center. I think it's an Adventist church, but the sign out front um says, Jesus is coming, look ready. um and
Look
and
ready.
after
Look
and
ready.
after and after a few months, I was like, do they ever change the sign? And now, like reading this book, I'm like, no, I kind of like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like,
And
don't change
again,
it. Yeah.
he is coming for you and for me, within, let's say, for all of us, in less than half a century. So there's not a whole lot of time left, and nobody actually knows how much time they have left. I mean, it's terrifying and liberating to think about this. Um, But and back to his kind of critique of where Christians publicly position themselves. I mean, one thing that he continually draws out here when he's talking about what is real revolution, he's saying that people who speak as though they're revolutionary, what they're usually doing is like scanning the horizon and then aligning themselves with the future that they think is coming anyway. At which point you are the opposite of revolutionary. You are conservative to reactionary. And again, I think that has so much to do with the what we see in, specifically US electoral politics is how much constant realignment there is in order to be on the side of power and then retroactively justifying or grandfathering yourself into the story so that you can be on the side of power. And you're only a prophetic critic when your side is not in power, but the second your side is in power, then, I mean, like in the Soviet Union, the party is always revolutionary. So anything against the party is definitionally anti-revolutionary. And if you read that from the perspective of someone who grew up in the US, it is so incredibly comical. Like, how did they keep thinking their completely stagnant, failing, kleptocratic, aristocratic system was revolutionary? And then you just kind of look at what's going on here is like, oh, we all have our versions of this. Well, we ultimately worship power. That's just the very simple fact of it. And that's why Christians trying to gain power, even for the good of the world, I think is the deepest and worst temptation because it doesn't reckon with how power itself is so unbelievably corrupting. I'm sure you grew up with the aphorism from what Lord Acton,
Mhm.
power corrupts absolutely. I mean, here at my ripe old age of a half century myself, it's like we don't take that anywhere near seriously enough. That is probably
Right.
the deepest truth of human sociality. So the aspiration to work with power, gain power for the good is always a delusion and temptation.
Mm, mm. Yeah. So towards so it's the last page. Um, he writes, the next step involves a way of living. Christians must pursue a way of life that does not differentiate them from others, but enables them to elude the influence of structures. The desired results cannot be achieved by attacking the structures directly, trying to make spectacular modifications, or striving to reconstruct a world from their every fragment. The only effective attack against the structures is to succeed in evading them and living on the margin of this totalitarian society, not by rejecting it outright, but by sifting through it thoroughly.
Mm.
Um,
I love that
Yeah.
word sift. I think
I
that's
do too.
a very potent image of sifting, because it's not either blessing or rejecting. It's very thorough evaluation. And yeah, I mean, he'll give us more detailed tools for participating in that. I think the counterpart for him there is living as though the lordship of Christ is real and the most potent of facts. And again, though of course, with language of piety, grew up saying Lord, though I guess some churches have eliminated Lord. Huge mistake. The present lordship of Christ was not like really central to the way I was, formed theologically, but I find it more powerful now, and I don't think because of like fearfulness about other lords in this world, but um, it's so I think maybe because my own biblical studies lately have brought me again and again to the importance of parousia as intrinsic to the claim about Jesus as his incarnation, crucifixion, or resurrection or ascension. But the significance of this time between ascension and parousia is that the lordship of Christ is real but not visible, and not yet complete. It's deliberately not complete, that the mercy of God is allowing this space and time to exist when Christ's own lordship is not exercised in a totalizing way. And I think whatever the final victory of Christ means, we don't know, but I think we do know that it will not be like the totalizings that it's not just that it's the wrong person in charge in our current totalizing systems, but that the nature of Christ being all in all will be so fundamentally different from all totalizing efforts now that it's like the problem of saying human nature and divine nature, because they're both nature, they're akin concepts. Christ as all in all is nothing like the totalizing of the here and now that we experience.
and that, yeah, because I think, you and I exist in denominations where Jesus is um, kind of implicitly presented, like Christianity is implicitly presented as, we continue the movement begun by the dead Jesus. Um, um, and,
Or at least the
and
absent Jesus. Yeah.
rather than a present Lord, and uh, the lordship piece, because one of the things I appreciate about your work, is you do a good job of reminding people that the way they want to use Martin Luther to distinguish law and gospel is not, in fact, how Luther himself did it. And I think if you do have this biblical notion of um, there will be an end to time, Christ will come back. He is right now Lord. Um, that puts our obedience and witness in a in a frame where the law does more than just simply accuse you, and
Yeah.
the gospel does more than just tell you don't worry about it. um,
Right. Right.
that as Bart says it, like you've been set free for joyful obedience.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think the problem is then what happens when I'm not joyfully obedient, and how am I supposed to think about myself there? But I mean, that's this. We can maybe do a Luther thing some other time. But I think Ellul is actually relevant here because again, it's the absence of sin as a power that is actively interfering with my life with the Lord right now. I mean, that is the thing to be reckoned with, and for Luther, that's why in this life, it's important to it's necessary to distinguish between law and gospel, because otherwise we lose our connection to the Lord altogether. But for him, it's not like an ontological split. A lot of Lutherans theologians will talk as if the law itself is a power rather than the word of God that has been exploited and corrupted by the dominating power of sin. But yeah, that's that's a whole nother thing there. I think one last thing I want to pull out of Ellul, I mean, that interests me is how he stresses here that it is the particular discernment of each Christian conscience that responds to this specific and particular situation they find themselves in. And he says, you're not going to like this because it sounds like I'm denying any possibility for a united front or collective action. But the fact is, I mean, there's obviously a case for those kind of things, but I think he really has such enormous respect for the conscience before God to be able to say, I know what I know in my time and place. And as I hear and receive the word of God, and as the Spirit of Christ is active in me, this is what I can respond to faithfully. And I think that's also against the totalizing uses of the church to be a collective action machine that, again, are so tempting to the main line. Is that I'm not going to go into great detail, but I heard a high-ranked denominational official of my church basically suggest that the reason for all the contemptuous deplorables in our denomination is to give statistical heft to the advocacy work that is done in DC and at the UN. And I thought I was no longer capable of being shocked by things that denominational leaders said, but that one shocked me to the core. The contempt for the constituency, except for their statistical usefulness for advocacy. And in that respect, Ellul was here as a breath of fresh air that your faithfulness where you are is actually what God needs you to do. And I don't mean that to radically reject collective action, but we have way too much. Give way too much of our Christian conscience and energy to something that is only statistical and not real.
Well, it made me think of because I've read a lot of Bonhoeffer this past year, as I've shared with both of you, and Bonhoeffer is someone whose icon is used by the church for collective action. But when you in fact read him, he doesn't sound any different than Ellul. That for him the commandments are not general principles applicable to everyone. That it
Right.
really is a matter of individual
Yeah.
conscience in every aspect of your life.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
because Jesus is alive and he's calling people to do things.
Right. Right. And also the churches who love Bonhoeffer never seriously engaged with all the things everybody else but Bonhoeffer got wrong. I mean, in the end, there was like one guy who, maybe by sheer, statistically, one person had to not be wrong. I mean, you can read that a lot of different ways, but the content reasons why everyone else was wrong are not seriously engaged with. It's just Bonhoeffer becomes the symbolic hero without any real content to his heroism. If you
And that made
all
me,
of that.
yeah, because Todd and I were talking last night about Nicodemus, that like so many of the church fathers just impute to Nicodemus a cowardice or a sinisterness that is absolutely not present in the text at all.
Yeah.
And then that made me think, well, we do the same thing with the Samaritan woman,
Mm,
positing things about her that are
mhm,
not present in the text.
mhm,
But then we do it with Caiaphas too, and I think it's a misreading of the Passion story to not think that someone like Caiaphas thinks he's doing what is necessary in the moment
mm.
on behalf of his people. This is not a sin of a supervillain. It's a sin of someone trying to interpret the world around them and do what's right.
Yeah, I mean, like, the whole book of Judges, people did what was right in their eyes, not what was wrong in their eyes, what was right in their eyes. Again, I think for Luther, the human condition it is our very pursuit of righteousness that exposes how deeply corrupted we are. And again, that's terrible if your public presentation as a Christian or as a church is, "We are here to be righteous and do the right thing." Well, that's exactly where your sin is going to be manifest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the last section of this chapter, I'll just read this. In the end, it could be that in communities that hold to a way of living of this order, the seeds of a new civilization may spring up. At present, it is not for us to be concerned yet with this eventuality or to distract ourselves with enticing vistas. The first step to take is to become aware of our world, or to say it another way, to take up a revolutionary stance. If this first step is not taken, everything else is utopian, and it is perfectly useless for Christians to concern themselves with social or political questions. Although it seems like an intellectual or spiritual process, that is not at all that is not all it is, in fact. It is an extremely difficult decision to make, this decision to break with the ways of the present age. What we are concerned to discover, then, is whether Christians will be bold enough to risk everything in this accomplishment of their function.
Hmm.
That's really good.
Yeah.
It's really, really
Really
good.
good.
Yeah, I'm afraid most people won't get past the first sentence, though, like, "Ooh, the seeds of a new civilization starting right here."
Yeah, I would. I reading that, I thought about. I think it was a couple of days ago in the New York Times. People can look it up. There was an unusual for the New York Times, a story about this Christian community in Western Ukraine that I think were originally founded by charismatic Pentecostal evangelists, um, who are in the midst of this invasion by Russia, committed to living what looks like to us like a Mennonite way of life.
Mhm.
And it was, I found it moving.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I think, Ellul would say you can start doing that wherever you are. You don't have to move or be in extremity to start. And, so a teaser, next week, I think he'll start talking us through how to even begin.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks,
Enjoy.
Jason. Todd, bye.